All right, so this is one of my favorite types of test questions you'll see on the AP test. So you've got two classes, base and a derived class. So derived is the subclass, and you've got the statement here that creates a variable of type base and assigns it data of the derived type. Go away. And then the question is, what happens when you ask the object to call method 1? So there's two things that happen when this method gets called. The first thing is that Java looks at the type of B and says, all right, B's type is a base variable. So that's its variable type. So it's a base variable type. And so what Java first does, it goes, all right, let's look at base objects. Do they support a method called method1? And it does. So that means this method is a legal call, and Java will proceed with evaluating what the method does. So the second thing that Java does is when it actually does the method and figures out what its result is, it looks at the real data that the variable holds. And what it holds is a derived. So even though it has a base variable type, the data is of type derived. And what that means is that the way that the object will behave as if it's a derived type. So let's go through what happens when we do b.method1. So because it's of type derived, it's going to want to use the overridden version of the method1 method. There's a version of method1 in the base type. There's a version of method1 in the derived type. This is the overridden version. So because B contains derived data, we're asking it to do method 1, it's going to use the derived versions of method 1. So here's where it gets hard to keep track of everything that's going to happen. There's going to be two commands that happen in sequence. It's going to call super.method1 followed by a print of C. So I'm going to just sort of make a note of that. We're going to do super.method1, which I'll abbreviate, and then afterwards it's going to print out C. So what I know now is at the end of my execution of this command, the last thing that will be printed out is a C. But now we need to figure out what super.method1 does. Okay, so super.method1 means go to the superclass. The superclass is base. We go up there, and we figure out what its method 1 does. Well, it does two things. It prints out A and then calls method 2. So I'm going to write that down here. It's going to do A followed by a call to method 2. And then still at the end, we're going to have the print of C. So we know it's going to go A and then C. And now we need to figure out what method 2 does. And this is the most complicated part of this whole process. So here's a call to method 2. And what most people think is that means that you should call this method here because it's in the same class and that sort of makes sense. But when this method gets called, Java essentially has, or the object I should say, that we're calling these methods on, has what I call an existential crisis. It thinks to itself, okay, what am I really? At the very beginning, B had that crisis and thought, what am I really? Oh, I'm a derived. So when I call method 1, I'm going to use the version of method 1 that fits with what my real type is, that I'm really a derived object. So this happens again when method 2 gets called. The object has an existential crisis and goes, okay, who am I really? Oh, I'm really a derived. So when I call method 2, I actually mean this method 2 down here because it's what my real type is. No, that's a little complicated, but that's how this method call will be dynamically bound to the version of the method that's overridden in the subclass. So it won't pick this one, even though it's in the same place where it was written in code. Because the object we're talking about is a derived object, it's going to use the overridden version of method 2, not the original version. So that means method 2 is going to have two commands in it, a call to super method 2, followed by a print of D. And we still have the original print of A and the print of C. So now we just have to figure out what super.method2 does, and that's the original version of method 2, which prints out B. So that's why the total number, or the total print statements are A, B, D, and C. So our final output would be one big line of text, A, B, B, C. Oops.